This is Around the A, a weekly look at the top stories, news, and interviews from the NHL's top developmental league, with your hosts David Foote and Patrick Williams on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Episode 21 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network and wherever else you get your podcast. David Foote and Patrick Williams back again after our long hiatus and our season cancellation special, if you will. Lots more news coming out over the last week or so. Not necessarily cancellation related, but we've got awards being handed out. We've got at least one affiliation that has been renewed, and we've also got a finalization on an arena deal for the team in Vegas. We're going to talk about all of that and a whole lot more on this episode, so glad to have you along. It really has been a pretty busy week given the circumstances, Pat.
Yeah, I was thinking about that today, that aside from the fact they're not actually playing hockey, this is a busier time right now than a typical May for me. Usually things somewhat quiet down right now, and instead it's been anything but that. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that going ahead, given everything going on off the ice with the current pandemic. But the first weekend change of the post cancellation has been a very busy time.
Yeah, it has. We'll get into a little bit of the COVID-19 cancellation fallout, if you will, and a whole lot more with Ken Wiebe coming up in just a little bit. He covers the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic, but spent 10 years doing the circuit in the AHL and has some great stories to tell. And then speaking of great stories and AHL veterans, Mike McKenna is going to be with us again coming up later on in the show to break down Henderson. That's just outside of Vegas, where the AHL team will actually be based. Their arena deal is done. We'll talk about that a little bit as well with him. Let's start with the freshest news of the week, if you will, Pat. The AHL putting out its all-rookie team awards and the first all-star team and second all-star team as well awards this week. And let's take a look at it. The first thing that I notice is, especially in the rookie team, a whole lot of North Division flavor in that group. A couple guys from the Belleville Senators here that were, even though I couldn't vote for them, no doubters in my mind in Josh Norris and Alex Formanton. But it seems to me like the coaches, the players, the media around this league who get to vote for these awards seem to get it right, in my opinion.
Yeah, everything on that list, I'll just recap it. Caden Primo in net from the Laval Rocket, defenseman Joey Keane started the season with the Hartford Wolfpack, was traded in February down to the Charlotte Checkers, obviously a Carolina Rangers trade. Brogan Raverty, like you mentioned, another North Division player coming in from Utica. So that's your defense. And like you said, forwards, Formenton, Norris, and Jack Stanika from the Providence Bruins, who had a fantastic season. So I think for the most part, all of the picks tracked with what most people had. I think you might be able to quibble on a pick here or there, but certainly that forward group, absolutely. Two players that's quite familiar with Belleville, and then obviously that defense and Caden Primo. What a story! A 7th round pick, came in as a 20-year-old and made a great push. Even had a start with the Habs. In Bell Center for his NHL debut, about as good as it could go. So. A pretty solid group. This is always an interesting group. When you look at some of the players that have won this award, Zdeno Chara, players like that, John Carlson, Logan Couture. I mean, a real who's who of some current NHL names, both past and present, really. So it's interesting to see some of these players and who makes it and who doesn't long term in the NHL. But getting named to this team is a very good sign for your future NHL career, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and so many obviously worthy candidates that got left off the list as well. Lucas Alvines, who had an excellent campaign out in Chicago. Owen Tippett in Springfield had a great season as well. So it's one of those things where when you can only pick one guy at each position, someone's going to get left off the list, but it's an incredible accomplishment to be noticed by, as I say, players, coaches, media around the league, especially when you're playing, I think, in somewhere small like a Belleville or Utica or something like that. An incredible achievement for those young guys. And then you turn to the all-star teams, the best players in the league, if you will, first and second teams, and, well, Josh Norris pops up again because he just had that good of a rookie season, but he's surrounded by some exceptional talent as well. Sam Annis from Iowa was the right winger. Reed Boucher, who is going to be in the mix for my money for the league MVP as well. Brennan Manel from Iowa, Jake Bean from the Charlotte Checkers on defense, and Bean had another outstanding season, and then Capo Kakinen also from Iowa in goal. That's the first all-star team, and it's not surprising to see so much representation from the Iowa Wild because, I mean, we've talked about them on this show over the course of the season as well, that was a group that was really getting it done by committee, plus two of the top scorers in the league.
Yeah, Sam Annis, fourth year in Iowa, still hasn't gotten an NHL game yet. 26 years old right now. He's going to be a unrestricted free agent this summer. I'd expect some NHL clubs to really give him a good look. He's that modern day player, shifty, really smart, smart player, and smaller player. And but he moves well. He had a great partnership this year with Jerry Mayhew, had 39 goals to lead the league, 49 games. So that Iowa team was just remarkable. And then obviously Kakinen and net looks just about ready for the NHL at this point. Did everything you could ask for from the Iowa Wild. So it's been interesting to see Iowa's evolution the past couple of years. For the longest time, they had a really difficult time both developing players and winning games, and Minnesota's really turned that system around in the past couple of years. And this Iowa team, I thought, really could have given the Milwaukee Admirals a run for their money in that Central Division, and then certainly in the Western Conference overall. But we'll never know. But well-deserved accolades, I think, for them having so much representation in that group.
Well, and you speak of the Iowa Wild, and one guy who some felt got snubbed from a first All-Star vote, but did crack the second All-Star list in Jerry Mayhew, who was chasing that elusive goal mark, a big piece of the puzzle. But again, when you've got only 5 players, one at each position, somebody's going to get left out, so to speak. But obviously he's recognized there on the second All-Star team.
Yeah, absolutely. He was, like you said, chasing that mark, trying to become the first player since Alex Giroux in 2010 with Hershey to hit 50 goals. Not an easy thing to do in this league. For one thing, you're only playing 76, in some cases 68 games. And quite frankly, if you get really hot, there's a good chance you're going to be called up. Jerry Mayhew actually did get some time with Minnesota this year. A really nice player, a lot like Annis, who came in with not a whole lot of fanfare and has just really made himself into a top-tier player at this level, and I think can compete for an NHL job next season. But I also wanted to give a real plug to Connor Ingram. What a story. Last year, he was an all-star with the Syracuse Crunch. Fell out of favor there with Tampa Bay management. I think that's probably understating it considerably. Found himself demoted to the ECHL late in the year. Was moved out in the offseason for a 7th-round pick, goes into the Nashville Predators system, and teams with a veteran guy like Troy Grosnick in Milwaukee, and just had a fantastic bounce-back year. Still only 23 years old. Every reason to think that he has some NHL potential. Got himself a new 3-year deal with Nashville this past March, and has completely turned his career around. So as bad as it ended for him in Tampa/Syracuse, it's gone equally well for him with this new lease on life here.
You can find the full list of AHL first and second team All-Stars, of course, at theahl.com. You know, you're splitting hairs when it comes to naming those teams for sure. Drake Batherson got in there again. Have to give the Belleville shout-out. And for a guy who only played 44 games in the league this season. He had 23 up in Ottawa, still managed to put together 54 points. And again, it says something when you're getting noticed and you're playing, in some cases, 15, 20 less games than some other guys are.
Absolutely. I mean, what a season he had. Like you said, some limited time in the American League. And I think if you're an Ottawa fan, and I mean, we've been over this many times, but there hasn't been a whole lot to be happy about in the past 2 or 3 years. And maybe the biggest thing that you take away from this season in Belleville is the players driving the bus there are the prospects. Batherson, Formenton, Josh Norris, right down the list. So these are, real young talents that have a real future in Ottawa. And this isn't your typical situation where you have an older player and they're doing a lot of the scoring and a lot of the heavy lifting for the AHL club. These are the real prospects, guys in the 20, 21, 22-year range. And all three of them, and just that was a fun team to watch all year, that up-tempo game. And, it's a shame for Belleville and for Ottawa that the season did end the way it did, because that was a team with a really good chance to come out of the Eastern Conference. And once you get into the final, we've seen it before, time after time, anything can happen. And they would have had a great chance to bring Ottawa a Calder Cup, the first one since 2011, and just send the entire team at both levels into the summer on a high note. But it was not meant to be. And they'll have to settle for seeing those players in Ottawa at some point, maybe as soon as next year.
Yeah, and I would imagine Drake Batherson is not in the running for any AHL awards next year because he'll be in Ottawa. I think Josh Norris will get a look depending on his camp. Certainly his performance shows that he's good enough to play in this league. I always kind of have that feeling that a hot rookie season in the American League should probably be followed up by at least a partial sophomore season with the same results, but I know the Ottawa fans will be screaming to see Josh Norris up in the NHL, and there's a good chance that he could end up there. So you would think a lot of those guys getting on that AHL All-Star list will certainly be getting a look from their NHL teams when all of this shakes down. And we're going to get into it in just a couple minutes here with Ken Wiebe from The Athletic about contracts and the older guys who might not want to stay in the AHL and might go somewhere else. There could be spots opening up for some players.
The entire player market this summer, whenever it does actually happen, and that's very much a question mark at this point, is going to be something we've never seen before. And you look at a player like Sam Anis, who, like we said, will be a UFA. For some of those players, at the very least, even if there's not an NHL future for them, this is a chance for them to really score a nice, lucrative contract at the American League level. And some of the salaries in this league in the last number of years have really climbed at the two-way level, where you can make $450,000-$500,000 a year just playing in the minors, let alone if you get an NHL one-way, like Daniel Carr last year got with Nashville, the MVP. So those players now, and I've had this discussion with a few players and agents, just they don't know what to expect. How do you time the market? How do you assess what the market is? Obviously, there's issues over in Europe with the leagues there. Where will they be? And just there's a ripple effect. Anytime there's a shortage of jobs, eventually it ripples down to even the better players. And we won't quite know how this breaks down. We have no real precedent to go on, but I think it's going to be a real tight market, and that's why you've seen a lot of players signing deals early, getting an extension, maybe settling for an American League deal in the past month or two, because kind of you take the money while you can get it, because you're not quite sure where it will be down the road. So these are uncharted times, certainly for the leagues and for teams, but also for players and their agents as they try to assess the damage and to evaluate the landscape that awaits them.
Yeah, uncertain times for sure. And here on Around the A, part of what we're trying to do during these uncertain times is get a little bit more perspective from, as many different sources as we can. This week, we're going to get that perspective, as we mentioned, from Mike McKenna, the now analyst for the Vegas Golden Knights. A lot of insight on what it might be like to be a player during these times, and then we'll dig deeper into the move of the San Antonio Rampage to Vegas. or Vegas area, if we're being specific. That's all coming up. But first, we're going to chat with Ken Wiebe, who covers the Winnipeg Jets for The Athletic. He has been all around the American Hockey League over a 10-year span, covering the Manitoba Moose. You can find him on Twitter at Wiebe Athletic, and you can hear him as well on TSN Radio in Winnipeg. So let's break for that chat with Ken Wiebe, and then we'll come back and talk a little bit more about the AHL's move to Vegas when we return. It is 21st episode of this first season of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network. Thanks for doing this, Ken. How's it going?
Very well, David. Thanks for having me. Patrick, always good to reconnect.
Good to catch up.
Yeah, what's life been like for you over the past couple of months since this all began, and being in an NHL market as well? How strange has it been to just have everything come to a screeching halt?
Yeah, no doubt about it. It has been very odd, David. I was able to see the Manitoba Moose play a couple of games, and then Murat Tesh, my colleague from The Athletic, actually went out on that last road trip, and I made a quick vacation to Arizona when everything hit the fan. So it's been an interesting time. I had a full-on 14-day quarantine, and I've been living in self-isolation for the most part here during the last 2 months and change. So, we've been fortunate to keep the creative juices flowing and work on a couple of projects that you wouldn't necessarily have time to do when it comes to keeping your readership connected, I guess, if you will. It has been interesting, though, no doubt about it. Watched a lot of TV, done a lot of cooking, and certainly hoping to get some news here in the next little while, and certainly paying attention to all the news that's been happening, obviously, with the AHL having to cancel their season. It's something that I keep my eyes on the league, and as you mentioned, covered it for a long time. And again, he would never want to make it about himself, and you guys had him on, but just kind of an unfortunate thing overall for David Andrews after such an incredible run as president and CEO of the American League, that even though he probably wouldn't say it out loud, I think he should have been able to present that trophy this year and kind of walked into retirement that way.
Yeah, it's a tough go for him. We've kind of been saying here it's almost fitting in a sense that the league is facing something absolutely unprecedented that nobody could have expected, and here is Dave Andrews, who's been around the league 20-plus years, and he's the one who has to kind of guide them through it before he rides off into the sunset, so to speak.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And again, Scott Housen is going to do a great job. He's a guy who has tremendous passion for the league itself, for hockey in general, and we know that Dave Andrews will be there for support moving forward, and he'll be working right till that last day before official retirement. But and again, he'll keep an eye on the league, and he wants to see it flourish and grow. And yeah, he's had to navigate a lot of landmines over the years. Patrick and I have been covering the league for a long, long time, and seeing the California division get come to fruition. There was a time earlier on where there was similar discussions about potentially having more teams in almost like a Florida Panhandle kind of idea. So it's been interesting to see a lot of affiliations. Obviously big news recently with the Hershey Bears extending with Washington Capitals. That's been one of the best affiliations for a number of years, and I had the opportunity to cover that Calder Cup final between the Moose and the Hershey Bears. Two incredible teams and filled with future NHL stars. Love to see that affiliation continue. And on the flip side, seeing San Antonio leave the AHL, that's a sad day for anyone who covered a game in San Antonio. It was a great market. There were a time where trips to Houston and San Antonio as a combined road trip were absolutely fantastic, and not just because obviously the weather was better than it was in Winnipeg at the time, but those are teams that were fun to cover. I covered games at the Compact Center, but also at the Toyota Center, and Houston's a great market, and hopefully there's going to be some hockey on that front eventually. And haven't had the chance to be down at Cedar Park, but by all indications, Austin is just an absolutely tremendous market. in the American League. And I mean, you like to see more teams in Texas have that kind of a rivalry, and hopefully at some point they can find a way to get a team there again in some way, shape, or form. But I mean, at the same time, as someone who loves going to Vegas to cover the Golden Knights and seeing what it's meant for their community and how they've brought that level of hockey and entertainment, I also think that Henderson will do a great job knowing what the Golden Knights have done. And I mean, this whole Vegas-born really put to rest all the people who said it would never work there. It's too much of a transient city. They'll never get behind it. But the Vegas-born thing is real, and they're a strong, community-minded organization. And obviously, having a team in Henderson, I think, will only help grow their franchise as it continues to evolve.
Chatting with Ken Wiebe, who writes for The Athletic, covers the Winnipeg Jets. You mentioned a couple things there, affiliations, and then, of course, Vegas. We're going to chat with Mike McKenna coming up a little bit later on in this episode about that franchise move to the Vegas area. But speaking of affiliations, let's chat a bit about the Jets and Moose relationship. How well has that been working out of late? How strong has that connection been, especially this season, given the amount of prospects that are in the Manitoba Moose Winnipeg Jets system?
Yeah, it's been interesting to see the evolution on that front as well. I mean, back in the days where it was a Canucks affiliation, there were definitely some challenging times at times. I mean, going right back to the beginning where Brian Burke wanted Stan Smeel to be the coach, and Mark Chipman and company wanted Randy Carlyle. Ultimately, Carlyle went up to become the general manager. But I mean, there were some interesting challenges on that front back in the day. I mean, having control of the farm team in the community can be a tremendous advantage. I mean, obviously there's situations like Providence, which is maybe an hour, 45 minutes to an hour outside. That's another great situation as well. And we know in Toronto and San Jose they have the teams in the same city. I mean, what that means in the big picture in terms of moving your players around, it can certainly provide a lot of benefits when you're not having to fly someone in from St. John's. I mean, I think the St. John's market was absolutely fabulous in the American League as well. I mean, having been someone who covered them when they were still, connected and affiliated with the Toronto Maple Leafs and eventually with the Jets. But I think it's been a good relationship. I mean, the Moose brand is something that's strong in the community. I mean, the Jets were gone for 15 years, and for some people, that was the only hockey that they knew for a long time until 2011 when the relocation happened. So, yeah, it's certainly been a lot of benefits, and the big thing with the Moose is that Pascal Vincent, having been on the staff with Paul Maurice, he does such a great job of preparing players to make that jump to the next level. I mean, no better example this year than Jansen Harkins, who basically in a span of 12 months went from fringe prospect to basically becoming an NHL regular. I mean, nothing is guaranteed coming out of the pandemic, as we know, but here's a guy who really worked hard at his game over the course of several summers, and all of a sudden not only got himself on the radar, but really established himself during his time up with the Jets. So, having Pascal there, I mean, he's such a sharp hockey mind. I mean, Claude Noel has told me numerous times he expects Pascal Vincent to be a very good NHL coach when that opportunity comes. We don't know when that will be, whether it will be with the Jets or someone else, but super sharp hockey mind. I mean, all their terminology is the same. They play the same system. And for young guys like David Gustafsson, who at 19 had such an incredible year, everything from unexpectedly making the Jets to going back to the World Junior to going to the minors and then playing, top line minutes when he came back. I mean, it just provides a really great opportunity for a young player who doesn't have to find an apartment or sublet something if he's called up and furthermore, on that flip side, I mean, you guys talk about the veterans. For a guy like Logan Shaw to know that regardless of whether he's in the American League or the NHL, he will be in the same city, that is a humongous advantage when it comes to both the player and the team themselves. I mean, especially if you have a family at that age, being in the same city and not having to shuttle back and forth is such a huge advantage for those players. And it can be a real big advantage when it comes to recruiting those depth players and important veterans that we know are so important to so many of those teams.
Hey, Weaver, yeah, that's a great point you make about Logan Shaw and players of his status being in the same city. I mean, how many times do we see a player get off the plane at the morning skate, fresh from St. John's? They've been up at 3 o'clock in the morning to catch a flight, 5-hour flight, and just everything that goes with that. I wanted to ask you about what do you think, in your experience, having seen this business from both sides, what do you think makes a good affiliation? There was that evolution there for the Moose. Yeah. We saw it over our time in Winnipeg that they had to adjust to that player development mentality. But Brian Burke, obviously not easy personality to deal with at times. What sort of evolution did you see through your time covering the Moose in their original incarnation?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I personally loved dealing with Brian Burke. I mean, he was great for the media. But, I mean, he can certainly, he has an abrasive side to him too. But I mean, if you're only dealing with him on a limited basis, I think he was really good to the Winnipeg reporters and radio guys and everything else. But yeah, there was certainly, especially given the dynamic. I mean, I know you guys talked about Dave and with Dave Andrews, and he, the way he was able to incorporate those 5 IHL teams. I mean, the mentality in some of those cities was so different compared to what the Canucks were used to. I mean, even though they had the Kansas City Blades in the IHL at one point as well, I mean, the importance of providing a winning culture, not just, of course, development is the first and foremost of importance when it comes to the American Hockey League, but if you have capable veterans who not only can be productive, but are also there to help lead the way and provide an example for a lot of these, whether they're first rounders or fringe players, I mean, you can establish such an important culture by having those players around. And the importance of winning is there, but the Canucks had to be convinced of the importance. And, they were never going to be a situation like the Chicago Wolves where they had, Steve Malte and a number of other high-priced veterans, but the value of having a good, solid veteran on a one-way contract to be a big influence, I think, is something that the Canucks did find some importance as they went along, and no better example than the year when they went to the Calder Cup final. Jason Krog was a guy on a one-way contract. He had plenty of NHL experience. He was kind of one of those 4A players, incredibly productive at the minor league level, but I mean, wasn't always put in a situation to succeed at the NHL level, but the value of having him on a one-way contract was so important for some of those young players who ended up being important players for the Vancouver Canucks moving on, whether it was a goalie like Corey Schneider or an undrafted player like Jason Jaffrey. Having those other guys around was so important for building culture. I mean, that's something that the biggest question mark for me coming out of the pandemic. I mean, how big is the economic impact going to be on some of those veteran players? And will some of them have to consider going to Europe where there's a better chance of making more money, or will they still want to chase the dream and be the 15th forward or the 8th or 9th defenseman where there's a pretty good chance you're going to get called up, but you're not entirely sure? I mean, that's a big one for me coming out of the break.
What do you remember from those early days after the IHL merger with the Moose, and what was that evolution like in those first couple years?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, to finish sort of the thought of your original question, I mean, the Moose had some guys that were on contracts and they weren't under contract to Vancouver, guys like Jimmy Roy and later on a Mike Keane. But the Moose, Craig Eisinger did such a good job of unearthing kind of some of the gems from whether it be in junior, where he found the late Rick Rippon, to guys like Alexander Burrows, who basically went from being a week or two away from thinking about retirement to having himself and his number in the Vancouver Canucks Ring of Honor. I mean, it's just an incredible story and situation. So, I mean, that's the thing for me. Obviously, it's a developmental league, and there's a ton of first-round draft picks that get a lot of credit and such valuable experience at the minor league level. But there's some of those other kind of great other stories where guys come almost out of nowhere to become NHL players, and they have to kind of overcome so many things and a lot of adversity, and and you're not getting some of the opportunities that a first-round pick might get. But then you also have some veterans, like Matt Molson is a great example for me. I mean, Alexander Giroux was a guy with the Hershey Bears for a long time who was incredibly productive, but just couldn't make it happen at the NHL level. Here you have a guy like Matt Molson who loves the game so much, made enough money in the NHL that if he wanted to, he could have just retired and gone off into the sunset. I mean, people were saying he didn't live up to his contract. Well, guess what? Matt Molson now is playing, and he's still a productive player at a very high level. And not only is he a productive player, he's helping future prospects learn the intricacies of the game and helping them get to the next level. And that's the beauty for me of the American League, where you have such a wide swath of player that come together. And the other part that we noticed, especially during the lockout year, you have some incredibly talented teams. I think of the Binghamton Senators team that had Ray Emery and Jason Spezza. They got bounced in the first round. It was incredible. I mean, this was a team that probably should have won it all. And the other time during the lockout, the Moose bounced the Rochester Americans, the team that had Ryan Miller, Jason Pominville, Derek Roy, and a host of other future NHLers. But that didn't mean the best team didn't always win. But the other part of it is that a lot of those young prospects who go through playoff pushes, they really seem to bond and gel when they get to the NHL level, and those guys become regulars there. That can be a really binding experience for a lot of those programs.
Obviously the AHL's number one priority is player development, but I always found the Moose to be an interesting example because for them the priority was selling tickets and winning hockey games and championships. How were they able to strike that balance between Vancouver's needs and their own needs? And how's that relationship typically work? And how's it obviously different now that the management group, Mark Chipman and Kevin Cheveldayoff, are on the other side of the equation as an NHL club?
Yeah, it's been interesting to monitor as well, Patrick. I mean, there were some lean years for some of those Moose teams, as you know, but I mean, they were always able to augment first by finding some East Coast League players, like I mentioned, guys like Jason Jaffrey and Alexander Burrows, but also in being able to foster that environment that we talked about. And I mean, Brian Burke himself said it at the time, you want your players playing in a market where they have to be held accountable. And that's something, again, we love all the markets of the American League, but there's a difference between playing in a place where there's 500 fans or 1,000 or in a place where there's 8,000 and there's, at the time, 2 newspapers with daily beat writers who traveled to not only home games but to every road game for a long stretch of time. I mean, after the Jets left, Winnipeg basically treated the Moose like an NHL team. I mean, I traveled for, I believe, full time for 7 or 8 out of the 10 years covering the minors. So I mean that was an important element as well. But I mean now it's still a balance. I mean the Jets, Kevin Cheveldayoff and Mark Chipman know that the priority is to get players ready, but they also see the value in having capable veterans like a Cam Schilling to be around a guy like Logan Stanley and guys like that. I mean there's incredible value from that. And I think obviously Kevin Cheveldayoff learned that from being around the Chicago Wolves, a team that operates a little bit differently than a lot of teams at that level when it comes to not being afraid to invest a little bit extra in veteran contracts and things of that nature. So I think that the Jets have done a pretty good job of knowing they want to have some veterans around, but even still, I mean, it can be a bit of a crapshoot. I mean, I think of Matt Fraser, who was a guy who looked like a perfect signing for the Jets, a guy who had NHL experience. He was a prolific American League goal scorer, but sometimes the fit doesn't work. I mean, Matt Fraser got a concussion early on in his Moose career, and he wasn't a guy that produced 20 to 30 goals like he was expected to. So there's a really fine balance when it comes to finding not only capable veterans, but guys who fit the culture and things of that nature as well. And again, I go back to Logan Shaw. Last year, Logan Shaw had an incredible year after taking the leap to, he left the San Diego Gulls after, attending training camp with the Calgary Flames. He had a history with Bob Murray, but he didn't have an NHL two-way deal. He the Jets signed him to a two-way deal, played tremendous hockey with the Moose, but never got a sniff from the Jets in a year where, under normal circumstances, they just didn't have any injuries up front, so the opportunities were limited. But for Logan, he saw an opportunity in terms of culture. He re-signed with the Jets rather than going to another market where he might have been a little bit higher in the pecking order. And it worked out for him. This year he played half the season with the Jets. So, I mean, it's a fine line for both player and organization, and striking that balance between winning and developing the kids. I mean, I think it's an ongoing battle, even for organizations who have been successful at it.
Recently, you did a really nice piece on Jason Jaffrey, kind of your quintessential 4A player, but a player that's had to battle just to get to the American League at one point. What do you remember from his early days with the Moose, and what did you see from him as he grew and eventually went on to play 49 NHL games and have a long career that ended just this past spring?
Yeah, I mean, Jason Jaffrey's just an incredible story of perseverance, Patrick. I mean, and I honestly somewhat forgot about how ridiculous the story was where, he was playing very well for the Cleveland Monsters or Lake Erie Monsters at the time, playing on the top line with the Sharks development team, but general manager Mike Mudd didn't have the paperwork updated and the visa was no longer valid. And not only could Jaffrey not stay on a team where he was a productive player, he couldn't go back to the Wheeling Nailers, which was the bottom end of his two-way deal, because of the visa issues. So here was a guy who went from finally carving out a niche for himself to basically being limited to playing in Canada. And I think the Victoria Salmon Kings were the only Canadian East Coast League team, and there were a handful of American League teams. So he gets the phone call from Craig Heisinger one day, and Craig says, "Can you be at Copps Coliseum for an 8 or a 7:30 start?" Jason was just outside of Wheeling, and he looked at his GPS, and he wasn't sure, but he said yes anyway, and drove straight to the rink, arrived just after the warm-up, and he told an incredible story. He's not in his suit. All he had was a gas station sandwich for his pregame meal. Walked into the room, Lee Gorin stepped up and wrote on the board, $100 fine for not being dressed up. He missed the warm-up already. Before he had stepped on the ice, he was losing money. No matter what he was going to make out of that game, he was losing money. But he scored a goal in that game. Two players were, Tim Smith and Nathan Smith, both had the flu, which was why the call-up was required. So here's a guy on an ATO, one-shot deal, drives not across country, that would be exaggerating a hair, but that was his opportunity. He made it work. He stuck through that year with the Moose, and then not only did he become a regular, he became a first-line player in one of the most productive lines in Moose history, playing with Brad Moran and Lee Gorin, and later on with, I think, Peter Sarno as well. I mean, he was just an outstanding producer. He went through so much getting to that level, and ended up being a dominant AHL player for a long time. Took a chance to leave the organization because he thought he might have a better chance with the Calgary Flames, knowing where he stood on the Canucks depth chart. Didn't work out, got injured, but ended up coming back to the Moose at one point before he went over, and he played for St. John's, also was the captain there. Had two close calls, got to the Calder Cup final twice and lost, but then went over to Europe and won, I think 3 championships in a row. So, I mean, incredible story of perseverance. But if he doesn't make it to the rink that day, he might not. I mean, again, you don't want to exaggerate, but he might not have played another American Hockey League game that year, which obviously probably would have meant he never played any games in the NHL. And here's a guy who became such a productive player and was an incredible leader. He scored a goal and had an assist in his first NHL game against the Anaheim Ducks. You go from not being on a team to scoring on a guy who was incredible in the Stanley Cup playoffs, a couple of years earlier. I mean, it's just amazing, the kind of stories that are found throughout the American League.
Yeah, a lot of people, discount the AHL because it's a level below the NHL, but the stories can be just as interesting, really. And speaking of interesting, anytime I get a chance to talk to somebody who covers the Winnipeg Jets and Manitoba Moose, I need to get in a question about Mikhail Burden, because he's got to be the most interesting guy between the pipes, I'm going to argue, in both North American leagues. He is just a whole pile of fun to watch, depending on what side of the ice you're on, because I can only imagine if you're Pascal Vincent, you're biting your nails and cringing a lot of the time. What's the thought within the organization on Burden, and do you think his kind of Wild West style of play might have to be reined in down the line if he wants to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, David. I mean, the Jets and the Moose are both very high on Mikhail Burden. Pascal Vincent speaks incredibly high of him and his ceiling and high-end abilities. Obviously, his puck handling can be an adventure at times, but it's also a weapon for a team that has rolled out a young defense core a lot over the last couple of years. I mean, Burden took an incredible step forward this year, 40-plus games at the American League level, but he got a little bit burned out early in the year after Eric Comrie was claimed off waivers and went through his own planes, trains, and automobiles adventure, if you will. Once Comrie came back, it allowed the Moose to go back to more of a two-goaltender set, and it allowed Burden the opportunity to get enough rest between starts that he was sort of lacking when he was a workhorse, but I think also overworked early on in the year. So, I mean, I see NHL potential there. I mean, I think it's a little bit early to say if he can be an NHL starter, but I certainly wouldn't rule it out. I mean, I think he is very athletic. He's very talented. I mean, this is not just a guy and he oozes personality. I mean, we've all seen the video of him scoring in the USHL. I'll give you a great example. This year, he played the third period in Calgary in a preseason game for the Jets, and when he was surrounded at his locker, someone asked if it was almost like a dream come true. He was like, well, no, my dream's not to play in a preseason game. My dream's to play in the NHL. I mean, yes, it was an exciting time for him, but his dream is not mop-up duty in a exhibition game. And again, that's the difference between a guy who might be happy to be there and a guy that wants to carve out a real career for himself. So he's certainly colorful. His English has improved, though he is not afraid to drop the F sharp in the odd interview, which is not abnormal for a European player. But I think he has some ability to back up that colorful personality, and I think he'll need another full year of development at the American League level before he's knocking on the door to compete for a backup job. But I mean, as we know, the Jets are fairly set between the pipes when it comes to Connor Hellebuyck, a guy who really benefited from his time in the American League as well before becoming a Vezina caliber goaltender.
Last thing, Weaver, in a lot of ways, your career kind of followed that of a player or coach in that sense that you started in the minors, worked your way up for a long time, and eventually reached the NHL. What did you learn, and I guess really what can young media people learn going through that experience and kind of going into that day in and day out grind in the American League?
Yeah, Patrick, I mean, I love my time in the minors, and again, I love covering the National Hockey League. It's the greatest league in the world, and the quality of the hotel maybe has improved somewhat over the years, but the American League has such incredible access to so many of its colorful characters. I mean, at the NHL level, you can't sit down with a captain of a team for 10 or 15 minutes on the bench at the end of practice or have a lot of extended conversations. So for me, I loved my time in the minors. I covered minor league baseball as well, and it's just a great opportunity to tell great stories. And I mean, for me, was it a grind? Yes. I mean, this is in a time, I don't want to sound antiquated, but I traveled on the bus with the Moose for some time, and we're not talking about being around the Eastern Conference. I mean, this is a Friday night in Toronto, Saturday afternoon in Cleveland, and a Sunday afternoon in Hamilton, where you have 7 to 8 hour bus rides and borders in between. And I mean, if you can cover hockey in the minors, you can cover it at the next level because you learn about the grind. I mean, I understand a lot of young people want to start at the top. I mean, even if that means blogging at the NHL level. I mean, I would encourage people to spend more time in American League rinks and have an opportunity to have more one-on-one conversations and be able to tell some of the stories that you just don't have access to at the next level. I mean, for me, Randy Carlyle was an incredibly smart hockey man, but he could be difficult to deal with as a member of the media. I mean, that's something that we saw at the NHL level as well. But for me, it was so valuable being around someone like Randy, who was hard on me at times, but also taught me a lot about the game. But Randy Carlyle also taught me a humongous lesson on one of those 3-on-3 games where I couldn't connect to the dial-up internet in Quicken Loans Arena. Now, again, this sounds ridiculous. In today's day and age, we could just tether up the phone on the bus, no problem. But back in those days, it wasn't an option. Afternoon game in Cleveland, the bus was leaving at, let's say, 6 o'clock for a 7-hour bus ride to Hamilton. I cannot get my computer to connect, and I have to send this in. I think I might have had a cell phone, but I couldn't have called in the story. It had to be a real emergency. So finally I get connected. I send it in. I am now sprinting to the bus as fast as I can with my laptop over my shoulder. I get to the bus. I am sweating. I looked at Randy and I said, "I'm really, really sorry. I'm sorry." I sat down, and he stood up in front of the entire team. They were all still, their food had just arrived, so he had an opportunity. He saw an opportunity to, not to lighten me up, but it was a teachable moment. So I was late for the bus. He let me know that I was no longer, the bus would never wait for me again. I was a guest on that bus, and this was unacceptable. Do you think any member of the Manitoba Moose missed the bus that year? Not a chance. They saw what happened when you missed the bus. It was, again, I'm sure Randy would have done it to a player as well. In fact, he probably would have left without the player, or at least scared him a little bit. But it wasn't personal. I mean, I was not happy about it at the time, but this was an opportunity for him. It was a teachable moment for him to his players. And I'm sure that, like I said, nobody was late for the bus that year. And in natural fashion, at the end of that road trip, I'm seated in a middle seat beside none other than Randy Carlyle. And we talked on the trip like nothing had happened. I mean, that was the joke. Scott O'Neill was the assistant coach at the time. He said, "Did you guys make up yet?" I'm like, there was nothing to make up. I totally get it. It wasn't personal. It was a teachable moment. But, I mean, again, it's a great opportunity for relationship building is the other part of that. I mean, the Moose had an incredible run of sending coaches to the NHL. Randy Carlyle to the Anaheim Ducks. Alain Vigneault was in here before he went to the Vancouver Canucks. He was the coach here. He was incredible to deal with on a daily basis. And to this day, when I see Alain Vigneault, we have a conversation. Like, there's a bond from when he coached here. I mean, same with Scott O'Neill. He went to the NHL with the Columbus Blue Jackets from here. I mean, they just had a succession of coaches that make it to the next level. And so many of the assistant GMs of the American League end up becoming GMs. I mean, players graduate, media graduate, executives graduate. I mean, it's a great place for learning. And I mean, I still love to go to American League games when I can. I don't go to as many as I would like to or I would want to, because I'm at the rink 4 or 5 days, or I'm 5 to 6 days a week as it is. But it's great to get to games, and I love to be in those environments. And I mean, I loved going to Syracuse and in the old barn for playoff series, and Doug McLean is yelling at reporters in the elevator. I mean, there's been so many magical moments from covering the minors. I mean, I used to go to the American Hockey League All-Star Classic every year, and then that's where I got to know Dave Andrews a little bit. And I mean, it's a great league to be following, and for a young reporter, it's certainly a great place to cut your teeth. That's for sure.
Something about the bus in Cleveland. I had to chase the bus. I was finishing an interview with Nick Baptiste right after he got traded to Belleville just a couple months back, and same thing. We had 5 minutes to squeeze an interview in, got it done, and thankfully he was with me as well, so Troy Mann held the bus, but I don't know if he would have if there wasn't a player there as well. Ken Wiebe writes for The Athletic, covers the Winnipeg Jets, and a veteran reporter of the American Hockey League as well. Thanks so much for doing this, man. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. All the best, and keep the podcast going. I mean, from hearing from our listeners and readers, I mean, it's something that is really helping people get through the days and provide a little bit of sunshine during a challenging time.
Listening to Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network with myself, David Foote, of course, Patrick Williams, and a big thanks to Ken Wiebe for sharing his time and his stories with us. I'm sure, Pat, once things get a little bit back to normal, we'll check in with Wiebe again because he's got all kinds of tales to regale us with. And it's always great to hear from somebody who has covered this league for as long as he has, and as you mentioned in that interview, made that transition to the NHL, and it, I think, really shows the importance of the American League for people in all aspects of the game.
Absolutely. I mean, the American League isn't just for players or for coaches or referees. It's for people like us in the media. It's for people in marketing and broadcasting and the accountant in the front office, all sorts of things. Executives, wherever you're at, you can learn something in this league. And I thought he made a great point. The amount of access that you get in this league is remarkable. As somebody who's been able to work at both levels, he's really able to drive that point home. And I can tell you, I worked alongside Wiebe for a long time in Winnipeg, and the best aspect of working at this level is, like you said, you can sit down, have 15 minutes with a captain, or you can talk off the record with a coach and really get their sense of things. And you don't get that at the NHL level. Simply, there's just the media demands and the availability aren't there. And I think as a young media person, you need to be down there in the American League, just like a player. Make your mistakes there on a smaller stage. And you look at his evolution when he came up and who he had to deal with. He had to deal with some challenging personalities: Randy Carlyle, Kevin Bieksa, Ryan Kessler, a host of let's say grumpy veterans at different times. So as a young reporter, you're gonna kind of sink or swim in that situation, and obviously he handled it and made it through and came out on the other side a lot better for it. So I recommend any young media person come to the American League for a while, learn the business from the inside out, and that applies at the OHL level or in college or the ECHL, wherever you can get your experience. You'll be that much better off if and when you do reach the NHL.
You can find Ken at Wiebe Athletic, Wiebe Athletic on Twitter if you're looking for him. We talked earlier in the show about the player awards, first, second team All-Star, rookie awards that were handed out, but some other big news breaking since our last episode that we discussed briefly on episode 20 is the affiliation renewal between Washington and Hershey. This is arguably one of the strongest partnerships, I would say, between an AHL and NHL club. They renewed for 4 years through to 23-24. Was there ever any doubt in your mind, Pat, that this deal would get done?
Not too much. For one thing, there aren't that many available affiliations at this stage of the business. 20 years ago, it would have been a different story. That's back then they were partnered with the Colorado Avalanche, but now NHL clubs, by and large, want their players close to home, and that, if you're the Hershey Bears, limits you to Washington, which is about a little more than 2 hours away, Philadelphia, but they're in a long-term relationship with Lehigh Valley. Pittsburgh just signed a 10-year extension with Wilkes-Barre Scranton. So there's no reason to fix what's not fix what's not broken, I should say. And that's been a relationship in the past 15 years that's produced a Stanley Cup championship in 2018 for the Caps, 14 Hershey alumni there, 3 more Calder Cup championships in Hershey, and then 2 more trips to the finals. And this year they were 1 point out of first place in the Eastern Conference. So it's the best of both worlds. You get that development environment that every NHL club wants, but you also get a really competitive club in a competitive market where the fans there demand the best. There's a lot of tradition in Hershey, 11 championships overall, 82 seasons in this business, which puts them only behind the original 6 teams in terms of longevity. So a player that goes into there is going to really get the closest experience you can get to the NHL without actually being in the NHL. And the list of players that came through that system are pretty remarkable. Ilya Samsonov, Semyon Varlamov, Michael Neuver, Braden Holtby, John Carlson, Jacob Vrana, right down the list. I mean, the number of guys that learned in that environment and then were better off for it going off to the NHL. It's a really remarkable place. It's a place with some real tradition and a top-notch facility as well. 10,500 seats. Basically, I call it a scaled-down NHL building, which is what it is. It has all the amenities of an NHL building, just a little bit smaller. And it's been a great partnership. Both sides like each other. Brian Helmer, a friend of the show, is the president in Hershey, has a really good working relationship with Washington management. So it wasn't in doubt, but it is one of those things, and you're never quite sure in this league until the paperwork is officially signed and announced. So for both sides, I think they were relieved to get this deal done, especially given the current situation that they all find themselves in.
Yeah, and while that deal is done, signed, sealed, delivered, if you will, a couple of other affiliations still up for grabs at the moment. Charlotte and Chicago, obviously with the San Antonio move to Vegas, that's kind of thrown Chicago in a bit of a loop because they were affiliated with the Golden Knights briefly there. And, of course, Charlotte and Carolina, which still, to me, makes zero sense why they can't figure out a deal. I don't know a lot of the specifics, but that was a partnership that seemed to make sense. These are two clubs without affiliations, and we're not 100% sure at this point when those wrinkles are going to get ironed out.
No, we're not. I think that's probably a nice way to put it.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Charlotte's a defending Calder Cup champ. A year ago at this time, they were well on their way toward a championship. Again, they're doing it a lot like Hershey does. They win and they develop, which is all you could want. It's a little around, I think, 2.5, 3 hours between the two cities. So there's no real logical reason to break up that relationship. Back in 2010, when they first put the team in Charlotte, that was a pretty heavy lift to make that deal happen. The American League, it was a fair amount out of their geographical footprint. So that had to be worked out, and they managed to make it happen, and now they're thinking about breaking it up. So I don't quite understand it myself. I mean, I know some of the sordid detail. I don't want to say sordid details, but some of the behind-the-scenes situation involved. But it does seem to me that you would think they would be able to work it out, but at some point, both sides have to be willing to make a deal, and I'm not sure if they're there yet. But again, in this league, until it's official, it's not official. I've learned that lesson the hard way over the years. So we'll wait. We'll see how that shakes out. We'll see if the Florida Panthers go to Charlotte or not. And we'll see where the Carolina Hurricanes end up. But either way, this will have to be worked out. In some ways, maybe there's not as much urgency as there would be in a typical season, simply because we don't know when next season may start. But the sooner you can get the deal done, the sooner or the better off everybody will be. It's one of those headaches, and Dave Andrews, we've said this so many times on this show, he's like the firefighter of the American Hockey League. He has to put out a lot of these fires, and this is one more for him, one more parting gift before he rides off into the sunset.
Well, and as we continue to say, who better to deal with these types of situations before he heads out than Dave Andrews. One thing that is now done and official, and of course we'll keep an eye on those affiliation agreements and update you as soon as those deals are done and with whom. But one thing that is official, and there really wasn't much doubt, I don't think, but again, you can never count your money until you're sure you've won your hand. A little card reference for Vegas, because the Henderson City Council has approved the $84 million arena deal with the Vegas Golden Knights. The two sides are going to split it up the middle, $42 million apiece. It's not chump change by any means. And we both kind of tuned in to Henderson Council for a little bit over the meeting that they had earlier this week to kind of see what the reaction was going to be like. And there, surprisingly to me, was a fair amount of pushback from some in the community about, an hour and a half or so of public input comments that had to be read into the record because of social distancing and people not being able to be at that meeting. But they voted 4-1 to approve the deal, and that's great news for American Hockey League fans and Vegas Golden Knights fans down in that part of the continent.
Wasn't that quite the show to watch?
I mean, my day job takes me to a lot of council meetings, so it takes something quite important for me to have to willingly turn it on and sit through it. But it was quite the show.
Yeah, there was a fair amount of opposition, like you said. This has been a goal for Vegas, really, to get their team close to home. They managed to make it happen. 6,000-seat building. It's going to be a 20-year lease, set to open as of now, before the 2022-23 season. So that means construction has to start pretty soon. For at least the first two seasons, the team will play in the Orleans Arena, which is about a 5-10 minute drive from where the Golden Knights play on the Strip there. So about as easy as you could have for a setup. Vegas will also have an AHL training facility for the team itself in Henderson. So that Henderson team is kind of getting the real star treatment there, and it's a great location for the league as well. I went through some of the distances. Ontario, 3.5 hours away. Palm Springs, 4 hours. San Diego's 5. Tucson 6. So there's a chance for that team out there to have some bus travel and avoid some of that those longer road trips that teams find themselves in the Western Conference. So obviously you have a chance to have your players all living in one city the entire season, not shuffling back and forth like they had to do in Chicago, which is a great setup in many ways, but it is still a flight, and you have to get your players back and forth. This just simplifies everything for both players and management, and I think it's just going to be a real successful operation. There's a lot of money behind it, and I think knowing what we do know about the Vegas Golden Knights, that they'll put together a really first-class operation there at the American League level.
Yeah, and before we get into some more of the specifics about the rink and the relationship between the AHL team and the Vegas Golden Knights with Mike McKenna, I found it interesting some of the issues that these residents in Henderson were bringing up, because Henderson's a city of about, 300,000 people or so. Belleville is a town of about 40 to 50, maybe a little more, thousand or so. And the issues that people seem to have against, the team or the building of a new arena, it just struck me to how similar they were. Some of the ones we heard from Henderson were naming rights. Some of the people there wanted the name Henderson to stay on the building. Well, that's going to be up to the team if they want to rename it, similar to here in Belleville, what was the Yardman Arena, because it was essentially the rink was fundraised and built by the Yardmen who worked on the railway. Well, the Belleville Senators came in, sold the naming rights, and it ticked off a whole lot of people. It just goes to show you how small of a world it really is and how similar a lot of these markets are despite the size difference.
Yeah, it really is. That's a great point. I mean, when you think in so many ways, kind of the two opposite extremes of the American League, Las Vegas and everything that comes with that, and then Belleville, which is your classic smaller city, former OHL market, just about every way, completely different from Las Vegas. And yet those same questions come up over and over. And just a little bit of background on this arena deal, that it's being built where there's currently a music pavilion. And about 2 years ago, there was a bad storm in the area, and it damaged some of the shelter that was there for the fans. And it's a 20-year-old building. It's a little bit long in the tooth in some ways, but there's just a ton of money coming into that area in general. Essentially it's a suburb of Las Vegas. It's going to be about 15-20 minutes from downtown Las Vegas. But yeah, there's always going to be that oversight. And remember, any time with these deals, it's not just the deal itself. It's all of the maybe previous baggage that came with other deals or other political maneuverings. So people that aren't happy with those previous situations make that feeling heard now. But like you said, it did manage to pass 4-1. They got the deal done, and now it's full steam ahead for that team, and they're already hiring people in the front office level. And Mike McKenna is a great guest for us because he's seen it obviously at the player side, but now he's on the team side with his work with the Golden Knights as part of their broadcast crew. He's kind of that perspective from each side of the equation that will really be helpful for us to hear, especially under these circumstances. It tries to set itself up and get ready for business.
Well, let's find out right now from Mike McKenna what that affiliation might look like and how it might work. We'll get some perspective on how players are dealing with this COVID-19 stoppage as well. He's the winningest American-born goaltender in AHL history, and he joins us next on Around the Edge. Thanks for making some time for us, Mike.
Always happy to. It's just like everybody else, trying to find productive ways to stay active, to stay engaged with hockey without hockey. So doing my best to do so and pumping out content with the Golden Knights as much as we can and trying to stay current.
Yeah, and there's so many questions around when the NHL will be back. What sort of stuff are you doing for Vegas in trying to keep those fans out there entertained during these times?
Well, we really looked at it as a challenge for us to be able to connect with the fan base in this time and try to stay current, try to make sure that we're constantly giving them something to chew on here, to stay engaged with the Golden Knights. So we've had several initiatives. We've had the VGK Fit Challenge, where we post videos every day of workouts that you can do at home on your own. You can modify however you please. So that's one way we've done it. We've tried to do minimum 2 Knights reports a week, and they usually run about 40 minutes, and we talk about current events. We play some fun games at the end, and usually have a guest or two on, which have been a lot of the Golden Knights players. A couple of American League players within the organization have joined us a bit, and just some characters that are ancillary to the team. So plenty of that stuff, and really just, like I say, we're just trying to make sure we constantly give our fans something to chew on and something to keep them excited for the prospect of when hockey's going to be coming back.
Yeah, and we don't know, obviously, when that's going to be. Lots of discussion going on about that for sure. And as uncertain as things are for fans as when they'll get to see the game again. If you put yourself, back in your player's role, you're just freshly retired, really. How would you be handling this situation as a player with so many questions around when you're going to get back on the ice and getting prepared to really resume the season at an extremely crucial point?
Yeah, I really thought about this a lot, especially as we've interviewed players with the Golden Knights. There's not a whole lot you can do other than try to build a makeshift gym, in your garage or basement, run laps around the neighborhood or ride your bike or whatever it may be. It's just a challenge. You don't have your traditional gym set up like most do. You don't have ice, so you can't be out there shooting pucks, making saves on your blades. You got to find makeshift ways to do so. So I know I'd be doing my best to try to find things, whether it's with body weight, whether it's things around the house to improve hand-eye, just something to stay active and current, and honestly, really, really watching my diet. That would be the most important thing. I'm not doing that now at all. I'm trying not to eat a lot. I still think I'm eating pretty healthy compared to most, but I'll tell you right now, I'm a little fluffy. You know, I'm probably a solid 5 or 7 pounds over playing weight right now. But that would be the big thing, really, is to just try to stay in shape as much as you can to at least keep your lungs up to shape so that they're not burning when you're on the ice. Because that's really what you find if you take a lot of time off. And I found that this summer, I didn't go on the ice for 5 months. So from the last game I played as a goaltender with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms in April, the next time I was on the ice as a goaltender was during training camp for the Vegas Golden Knights when I was called upon to hop in for a practice. And I was absolutely sucking wind like you wouldn't believe. My cardio was terrible. Now, my puck tracking wasn't particularly great, but I was shocked that my movements were pretty good. Like, I didn't forget how to mechanically play goaltender, but man, I was just like out of shape. And that's really the challenge everyone faces.
Yeah, that's a challenge for everyone, for sure.
You know, Mike, talking to some different coaches and players, one of the concerns that's come up is because you don't have a firm starting date, it's really hard to kind of orient your training regimen to that, to say nothing of the fact that you don't really have your typical resources at hand anyway. How does a player strike that balance between training enough but not overtraining, given the fact they don't have a real firm sense of when they need to really hit their stride physically?
Well, it's a great question, and I don't know that there's a perfect answer to this, because you could probably ask different strength coaches, and they'll give you something that's a little bit different. If I were approaching this as a player, I think my goal would really be to try to maintain my playing weight, build some strength if I can, but I wouldn't want it to be like a full summer's worth of building and activity where you've got anywhere from 2 to 4 months building up towards training camp. I would probably approach it more so, again, in an enhanced maintenance, I guess you could call it. So more than you would have during the season, but not quite the same typical load that you would have during a summer when you're trying to build that mass and strength. And it's a fine balance, too. You know, players are going to have to find ways to take a couple days off here and there, or even a week off here and there. You can't just train without having a specific goal at the end. You're risking burnout. You're risking your body, getting acclimated to just doing things off the ice. So I don't think there's a really perfect answer to it, but yeah, if you can find a way to just get maybe an enhanced in-season training, to myself, that would probably seem like the optimum way to do so.
And just from a mental standpoint, these players already have been off for 2 months at home and kind of a very domestic situation. And now if the NHL comes back at some point in the summer, how do you switch that gear to flip back into hockey mode after you've not really been able to be in that mode now, since March?
Right, and boy, especially think about the players that have been largely in the American League, that if the NHL comes back and they need taxi squads or black aces or whatever they choose to call that, you're being called upon to come up and potentially get thrust into big minutes in the NHL, presumably in playoffs right away. So you talk about flipping the switch. This is where you're really going to find out who's mentally tough and who isn't. And you're also going to find out who's had the ability to take entire summers off the ice and just flip it at training camp. You hear the old stories about Marty Brodeur who'd pick his pads up at the start of camp, or Ryan Getzlaf who picked his skates up at the beginning of training camp after winning the cup, and he could flip the switch. I think it would benefit those players who take a lot of time off in the summer. And I don't mean in the sense that they go and just hang out by the lake for 2 months straight. I mean take time off in that they don't have to be on the ice right away like some guys think that they need to be. So in some ways, this may benefit the veteran guys at a mental capacity at least. I'm just not sure about the physical side for some of the older folks that are around the American League and in the NHL too.
Chatting with veteran goaltender Mike McKenna, a former goaltender, should say, now working with the Vegas Golden Knights on their broadcast team. Let's talk a little bit about Vegas. One of the big storylines now outside of the season being stopped and dealing with the pandemic is the establishment of a new franchise out there in the Vegas area in Henderson, and the San Antonio Rampage making that move. Do you have much of a sense of the plans for the Golden Knights and their new franchise, and kind of how they're going to deal with things here moving forward over the next couple months?
Well, it's all systems go. The Golden Knights are hiring right now. There's job postings listed for whether it's hockey side, front office side. It's all systems go. There's just a ton of excitement about the team coming to the Las Vegas area, specifically being in Henderson. It just streamlines the whole procedure for the Golden Knights. Having your development team in town, being able to help them become better players, get ready for the National Hockey League, and to bring it all under one house. And you still have the carrot being dangled, though, where the team in Henderson is 30 to 40 minutes away from where the team practices in Summerlin. There's still that carrot. You're in the same city, you're so close you can taste it, but there's still that degree of separation. And I think that's good. You don't want to be necessarily under the same roof at all times. You want to have the desire to make it to the next level. And, you look at what Vegas has done, too, with hockey. There's just this insatiable desire to have it in the area. The team sold out tickets at T-Mobile. They've sold more seat deposits than they have seats available at the Orleans for next season, where the team will be playing at least for next year until the arena gets built in Henderson. So brand new ice sheet in Henderson for a practice facility as well. 2 sheets, another going, brings the total in the area to much higher than it had been previously. So people are just loving hockey in Vegas, and it makes all the sense in the world for the team to have Farm Club there, like I said before, on so many levels. And the best part about it, though, thinking about it from a player's perspective, you only have to get one place of residence. You don't have to move. You don't have to get called up and wait for your possessions to show up a week later when they're on a flatbed in a car and you're hoping it doesn't get stolen. You're in Vegas. If you're in the A or the N, you're living in one spot. It's just going to be a great setup for everybody in Golden Knights organization.
What was the evolution of this plan? In 2017, they originally affiliated with Chicago, and it was a 5-year deal. It was looking like they would see it through, and at least early on for Vegas, it was a good fit until the pipeline of players and prospects filled up. But when did this really start to go into high gear to make that season?
Yeah, not really. To be honest with you, it'd be a better question for some of the people that are higher up than I am with that in terms of the actual timeline with this. It seems though like the plan had always been to try to have products eventually be closer to home somewhere, whenever that may be. But as you know, the dynamics of the American Hockey League, they're ever changing. You never know when a franchise will become available. You never know with expansion previously. There were teams coming in, teams leaving. So it just seemed as though that the proper steps were taken, that the timing was right for the Golden Knights to step in and do this now. That especially, like you say, the pipeline of talent has started to come along. There's prospects coming out of junior, out of college, draftees, signings. So that depth pool has very much become self-sustaining. And, of course, the hard part's always, acquiring a franchise in the first place. Mm-hmm. Well, they were able to find a partner for that. And, next thing you know, the ball's rolling and things come into place, too, because the city of Henderson very much wants to have a team there. 71% of people in that city think it's a great idea. And in terms of revitalizing an area of Henderson that could use it, where they're building, where the arena is planned to be built, is where an old pavilion currently is that's not even usable. So it makes a lot of sense, for the city of Henderson, for the Golden Knights, and for the American Hockey League, it just brings another team out west that doesn't have to travel quite as far, at least. And in terms of call-ups, it makes things so much simpler for the Golden Knights.
You were a player in Las Vegas very early in your career. What's that experience like as a young player? I imagine for some players there could be a little bit too much temptation there. But if you're a young player, what is it like to play in that kind of market?
It's fun. That's what it is. There's connections exist. I mean, even at the ECHL level, we were sponsored by Blue Man Group and had a partnership with Cirque du Soleil, and we're making $450 a week, and we're like third row at Mystere at Treasure Island, and it was wild, Like I'm not a gambler, I'm not a club person, but there's just always something to do. Now, what goes with that is that, you can get yourself in trouble in Vegas, 100%. But you can do that in any city. That availability is everywhere. But I can say this, though, about the mindset that we had with the Wranglers years ago in the ECHL. The players who couldn't cut it in Vegas, who couldn't live there, couldn't control themselves, they didn't last long. That's what it came down to. And part of that, too, is why the Golden Knights, especially when it comes to signing players, trading for players, they're very selective. They do a ton of homework. We really strive to have an organization that lives up to its own codes, and brings in good people, has a positive atmosphere around it, and has people that want to be there, that know how to properly respect and treat the city for what it is, and knowing the potential pitfalls that could possibly surround it, and ultimately just those players. That's what it comes down to. You trust the people you bring in because you've done the homework on them, and you think that they're in a position to succeed because, hey, you're playing in the National Hockey League. Like, there's nothing better in the world than that. And to do so in a city embraced hockey like it has, it's a big draw for those players.
Chatting with former veteran goaltender Mike McKenna, current analyst with the Vegas Golden Knights, a little bit about that new franchise coming to Henderson, just on the outskirts of Las Vegas. You mentioned a little bit earlier on, Mike, the increase in just ice pads that is coming along with having an AHL team there. And I think a lot of people can sometimes forget about the impact that these pro teams can have on grassroots hockey and growing the game in their various cities. I mean, Phoenix and Arizona saw a big spike when they got the Coyotes some years ago. What kind of impact do you see this having on grassroots hockey in that part of the country?
What this really does is just show how universal the sport of hockey is. And I'll be very frank, I'm so sick of hearing non-traditional markets. That phrase has got to get out of here.
Yeah.
Because think about this. Where's Austin Matthews from? Phoenix, Scottsdale, Arizona, whichever. He's from the Phoenix area.
Yeah.
There's draft picks from Dallas, from Florida. Shane Gostisbehere's from Florida. Like, there's so many players that are coming from these so-called non-traditional markets. And I just think that that's such a poor term, because think about how long hockey's been in Southern California for now. Like, we're talking 50 years here.
Mm-hmm.
And longer in some places. Texas, same way. Dating back to the old Central League, American League, there's been teams in these places. But it really takes an NHL team to grow it on the scale that we're talking about with the Golden Knights or Coyotes or Dallas Stars or Tampa Bay Lightning, any of these places. Minor league teams, it's great. It's still something of a novelty, though, in terms of fan base, and it's fantastic to have. We love playing in those areas. There's diehard fans. But it doesn't affect grassroots hockey the exact same way as the NHL does. And really the reason being is just because of the economic power associated with it. You have a chance with an NHL team to really jumpstart youth hockey. You put money towards it and invest in it. And it's not to say that American League teams don't do that. There's many who do a fantastic job of that. But it's on just a much less scale than it is. So it's invaluable. I mean, there's already been NHL players from Vegas. Jason Zucker, the Pittsburgh Penguins, formerly the Minnesota Wild, he's from Vegas. You're just going to see more and more of it. And it excites me as an American because anybody can play in the NHL. It doesn't matter where you're from any longer. And, our Canadian friends, it's tough for them to accept it, but they fill the arena in Tampa Bay every night. They fill the arena in Vegas every night. And that doesn't happen in every Canadian city. You know what I mean? So it's just has the same level of importance wherever you go throughout North America and the world.
When you look at the process to get this team established, they're going to start in this coming season, whenever that may be. What are some of the challenges that perhaps are being faced now because of the current pandemic situation? It seems like that would make it a little bit more difficult to get things set up and maybe build hype and sell see ticket memberships and things like that with so much uncertainty moving forward.
Yeah, if the American Hockey League team in Vegas was really getting off the ground now, I think you'd see an awful lot of that. Thankfully, it was announced early enough that season ticket deposits had already been put down. There's still a demand for it. We haven't seen much of that drop off whatsoever. So that's great news. Also, too, even with social distancing, building the practice facility in Henderson hasn't been a problem. They've been able to have contractors in doing their work while being safe, with all the distancing. and it's going up in a hurry. So in terms of infrastructure, things are going to be ready to rock. We just don't know what the landscape of the American League is going to be come the fall when, hopefully everybody's playing hockey again. I would say that uncertainty is more so what would affect anything other than building out the team, as the Golden Knights right now are truly building out, like we say, front office to training staff to broadcasting. Everything in Vegas is getting ready to rock.
What do you remember from your time playing at Orleans Arena? What was that experience like as a player?
Well, we came out through a big slot machine. Don't forget that. It rang 777 for the 18 players that hit the ice. I think everybody hit the jackpot. Man, it was wild. Like, we had a super creative in charge of our team named Billy Johnson that he'd do anything to get a headline, and we had Dick Cheney hunting vest night, mullet wig night, Elvis sunglass night, Governor Rod Blagojevich night. Like, it was kooky at best to say.
Yeah.
But really, aside from that kind of sideshow aspect that we had at the ECHL, the Orleans was a great arena. Horseshoe design, really, really nice and great shape, and just a fun place to play. It was your perfect size arena for minor league hockey. I believe the arena actually held 7,777 people at capacity. Not 100% certain on that, but I believe that's what we joked around about. If you can fill a building like that, you get anything over 2/3, 3/4 full. That's a loud place. And that's another thing too that the Golden Knights have done when building their American League arena that's on the slate in Henderson. As soon as it gets approved, they're building it to the right size. They're doing a lower bowl. You're not shooting for the moon here and building a 13,000 seat arena. You're building something that's manageable. I believe in the 7,000 range. So, and I think that's the perfect size. One lower bowl, put some suites around top, let people be able to walk in and out. The HE Center in Texas, to me, perfect facility for the American Hockey League. And I think you'll see something similar in Henderson once it's complete.
What was the thinking behind building a new facility rather than having the team play in Orleans and stay at Orleans going forward?
Well, you kind of control your own destiny a little bit, I think, when you're headed into a city in some ways. But the big draw, too, is just to have, your practice facility in Henderson and a team in Henderson. City of Henderson was thrilled to have Henderson as, the name for the recognition of it with the team, too. So I think that aspect's really your big one. Again, you're creating a little bit of differentiation there, not just being another property on the Strip. So it's just exciting. Again, you're spreading out the load over the whole valley, and it honestly it can take a while to get to the Strip from Henderson too. So, you're super serving your fan base that may not necessarily have ease of access of getting in and out too. So it should work on a lot of different levels.
Around the league, you see teams take different just to the marketing face and the identity of the club. What sort of fan out there do you think the Vegas will try to target as a fan base?
I think I've seen these numbers previously, but there is a large crossover right now of Golden Knights ticket holders and people who have put down deposits for the team at Henderson. So you are seeing some crossover there. Ultimately, the goal is to try to cater to families, much like every other minor league team. We talk about how it's got to be family friendly, it's got to be affordable. It's no different in Henderson. Again, this is a way to try to grow the brand. Maybe you expose school kids who've never been to a hockey game before, because now there's a little bit more inexpensive way to come see a game and to get invested in the Golden Knights and in hockey in general. So I think the demographics for the team at Henderson are going to be really, really similar to what you see across the board in the American Hockey League in a lot of places. But it's really been surprising to see just how much crossover there is between Golden Knights ticket holders and American League holders. People just can't get enough of hockey, I mean, man, I love hockey. It's like, if you want to go to 80-something games a night, like, hats off to you. Like, I want to shake your hand and one, say thank you, and two, just sit down and talk the game with you, because that level of passion is just amazing.
For as much as Vegas has the big attractions, obviously the Golden Knights, the NFL's coming, obviously all the entertainment. AAA baseball there has been a really big success. Team of the year, they won this past year. Do you think there are any lessons or any strategy that the new American League team can take from what AAA baseball's been able to do there with the new ballpark?
Definitely. It just speaks to Vegas that you have to have a first-class facility first and foremost. Mm-hmm. And that's the way Vegas works. Like, you got to have first-class facility, production, community service. Like, everything has to work because it's such a competitive market. You know, it's easy to lose your clientele to something else shinier, that's newer, that maybe, quite frankly, treats their fan base or something. I guess not fan base, but their ticket holders really well. So that's something that we've always strived to with the Golden Knights, is try to make sure that we're super serving our fans and make sure you treat them the right way. Mm-hmm. So I think from a minor league baseball team, you look at what you do, whether it's giveaways or whether it's your ability to leverage people in the Las Vegas area. It's really no different than what the Golden Knights are doing. You're trying to bring in this added element to what you have in Vegas. Because, think about it, like with the Golden Knights, you knew right away that it wasn't just going to be hockey. It's still Vegas. It still had to have that Vegas aspect to it. And there was a proper balance to be found between the two. It had to be shiny. It had to have its own flair, but the core essence of it is still the hockey. That's what matters. Mm-hmm. That's what's important. So what may have drawn people in at first is kind of some of the ancillary things. And ultimately, the people are sold on the players and on the team. And that's what I know that the team is going to try to do with Henderson, to make sure the players get in the communities, make sure they get out and go to schools. They do community functions so that people get to know who they are on a personal level. And then you build around that with the Vegas aspects, with the glitz and the production and everything that makes it Vegas.
Getting into our final few minutes of episode 21 of Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network. We'll remind you that you can interact with us on the social medias at Around the A Pod. Shoot us an email if you've got feedback, thoughts, guest ideas, discussion topics, whatever you want to get across to us. AroundTheAPod@gmail.com. And please, wherever you're listening to the show, whether it's on the Sports Podcasting Network, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, make sure to subscribe and rate the show as well, and make sure you don't miss a second of the insight and analysis from around the American Hockey League. A couple of good guests, I would say, this week, Pat. Some heavy hitters in the AHL conversation.
Absolutely. And NHL writer, 10 years almost in that business, TSN figure as well. And then obviously Mike McKenna, who's almost made a name for himself as a household name, which is not a small feat if you're basically a long-term minor league player. But he's gone on to a great career already as a broadcaster, which, let's be honest, wasn't that difficult to foresee, given his talents. But he was a fantastic guest and just raised so many interesting points. From the player side of what that will be like to play in Vegas. And he's done it. He played in the ECHL in that city, and now he's on the broadcast side. So that was a really fun interview to do. And obviously Wiebe was fantastic. One of my best friends in hockey, and, a great line mate in many a press box over the years. And he just has so many great stories. We only heard a few of them, but we could have had him on here for hours just going through some of his stories over the years.
From what it sounds like, it's going to be a whole lot of fun to be a player there, and that affiliation really seems like it's going to work out well.
Oh, absolutely. If you're a young player, I mean, what a setup. I mean, you look at Vegas and what they have for facilities-wise, their training facility is just, state of the art. Obviously, that whole experience there playing at T-Mobile Arena is remarkable, and they're going to have the same setup for the American League. And I think it's kind of telling that their temporary arena, Orleans Arena, is a 7,000 seat building, which would certainly compete well with just about any building in this league already. So they have that, and then that will be their stopover for 2 years before they go to their official home. Everything they do seems to, pardon the pun, turn to gold, and they've, I think, really found a great setup there, and I expect this franchise to be a strong addition to the American League.
Can't wait to see how things shake down with Vegas joining the American Hockey League. Can't wait to get into next week's episode as well. We can let you know that we're going to come full circle, I think, on the COVID-19 season pause reaction. We've talked to league management with Dave Andrews. We've talked to former players in Mike McKenna and others, and we're going to talk to the head of the Players Union, the Professional Hockey Players Association. Larry Landon's going to be with us next week to share some stories and some insight, and we're going to get into a lot of different aspects of this whole thing from the players' side.
Absolutely. And Larry, I mean, is a fantastic guest. He'll tell you exactly what he thinks. He's not as restrained as maybe somebody on the team or league executive side has to be. His insight from being a player in this league in the 1980s to 27 years running the Players Association is just, I mean, there's so much to learn from a person like that, and he's more than willing to share his expertise. So I think that'll be a really interesting look at that side of this equation.
We'll have Larry and more. And again, if you've got thoughts or ideas, at Around the A Pod on social media, or aroundtheapod@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you and get some feedback on what we're doing here. 21 episodes in, if you can believe it, Pat, here on Around the A.
Yeah, it's been a busy year, I guess you would say, and at times it hasn't been busy. And yet, as we mentioned earlier in the show, the past week or two has just been kind of go. Even without the hockey side of things. So, 21 down, and we got many more to go. And I don't think we'll run out of anything to discuss anytime soon. I think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg, so to speak, with everything involved with this COVID-19 pandemic. And just all the ramifications that are going to come out of it, because everybody right up to and including Dave Andrews, Gary Bettman, Bill Daly, you name it, are finding their way through this situation. And fortunately for our listeners and for ourselves, they're willing to share it. So it's been really fun, and trying to make the best of a very bad situation. And hopefully for everybody and for the hockey world, we all come through this better off than we went into it, and hopefully make the best of what is otherwise a very sad situation.
Yeah, and that's what we're trying to do here, is just keep the spirits lifted, keep everybody informed, and let you know what's going on around the AHL, because it is uncertain times, and we know that. And again, we'll be back next week to fill you in on whatever news breaks over the next 7 days. Until then, thanks for listening. Hope you've enjoyed this episode 21 of Around the A, and we'll talk to you next week on the Sports Podcasting Network.
Thanks for listening to Around the A. Be sure to tune in again next week. Find Around the A on the Sports Podcasting Network, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Interact with us on social media. Give us your thoughts using the hashtag AroundTheA, and follow us at Around the A Pod.